Good. I'd like to welcome everybody to the little call on manifesting miracles or removing the blocks. I'm Will Horton, Dr. Will Horton. I'm considered by some to be the world's leading NLP trainer. But let's just jump in. This will be a fun, fast course. Not course, just kind of information. So the first question would be, are miracles possible? You know, one of my favorite sayings is when something strange happens, is it odd or is it God? When those coincidences happen, when those things you can't quite explain. So is it just odd? Is it a happenstance, or is it God, the higher power of the universe, interacting with us? This kind of goes into the being at the right place at the right time. A lot of times, those of us that experience certain weird things, sometimes it's just being at the right place at the right time, right? And for this really to happen, you just have to see beyond the norm, right? So really, let's think about, obviously people are going to be listening to this, think miracles are possible. So what stops a miracle? Well, usually it's internal blocks or some kind of improper technique or fear. As we get ready to get started on like the background of all of this kind of thinking, this course actually, or this little call, is actually a byproduct of another class I'm doing. And the class I'm doing is on high performance, or as one of my favorite mentorees says, elite performance NLP, which I'm working on changing. Because for that, you have to study a certain part of the mind. And I'm like, this is interesting because I think this is one of the causes of a block that many of us don't think about. Right? So it's kind of as most interesting things that we discover, one of the things that happens is it's that fun byproduct of what's going on, right? But anyway, a little bit of the background. Those of you that aren't familiar with it, most of you probably are, it goes back a long time. James Allen was one of the first metaphysical writers. Wallace Wattles, who has a book, The Secret Science of Getting Rich, Secret Science of Health. Leads into like Emmett Fox, and again with Napoleon Hill about that time frame, right? Which leads kind of up to Dr. Maxwell Maltz with psychocybernetics. Napoleon Hill was As a Man Thinketh, Think and Grow Rich, all those things. Emmett Fox, As a Man Thinketh, Sermon on the Mount, things like that. And then, of course, recently, or a few years ago, we had The Secret, which actually, for those people who've been around it a while, goes, there's nothing new here. But it opened up this kind of thinking for a whole different generation that was never exposed to it, right? Great. Or people that, weren't exposed to it, weren't ready to hear about this at the time. So if you read this, and they all basically say kind of the same thing, why does it not always work? It seems to work sometimes, doesn't work all the time. Some people grab this and boom, they're off and running and, manifesting miracles left and right. Well, usually it goes back to improper technique or some kind of internal block. Because the technique is pretty standard when you look at all of those. If you go back and read all those books or look at how they say do things, all of the classics stress a full sensory imagination of the miracle, as if as it has happened. The goal, the miracle, whatever term you want to call it. It has to be a full sensory experience, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory as possible, as if it's already happened, right? And this is kind of hard. It sounds easy. It's a lot harder to do because your conscious mind blocks it. Because you're a conscious being. You don't want to go crazy, and when you start imagining things that aren't real, your brain says, whoa, so it'll make one little thing different, so this isn't real. It's kind of like when people imagine, let's say they want to manifest a new car, they start thinking about the car, there's usually one little difference between how they think about the car they want to manifest and the last car they actually purchased. Right? But it's that one little thing. Your brain's trying to protect you. So really, for this to work, you kind of have to remove the safety mechanisms, right? Because it's the blocks that get in the way. There's conscious interference. That's the one like, you want to your brain wants to put a safety in, right? So that can stop it. Also, there's a lot, and I've read a lot of people write, well, the reason it doesn't work is you don't feel worthy. Do you feel worthy of, a six-figure business, a seven-figure business, the fancy sports car, whatever it is, the beautiful spouse, whatever it is, right? Do you feel worthy? So you could work on feeling worthy, right? I didn't do enough to get this is basically what happens, If it's a windfall profit, oh my God, I feel guilty. Feeling worthy can kind of fall into guilty, right? The next thing that begins to happen is kind of conscious interference, which is limiting how it will come. You start thinking, well, if I want this, whatever it is, it has to come this way, which is, so your brain's, as we get to the reticular activating system, it's blocking out all the other ways it may manifest, right? Because that'll stop you from seeing the cues, which could take you down a slightly different direction, but it will get you to your goal. It's kind of like if I want to drive to Toronto from Florida, there's a lot of ways to get there. 95, then cut over, 75, cut over. There's a lot of ways to get there, But if I only think there's one way, I got to fly, well, it shuts off trains. And it's just, you have to be open. And this also goes into logical thinking. A lot of times, well, miracles by their nature are not logical. Sometimes these magical mystery things that happen aren't really logical, right? And if you try to apply logic, it can block it, right? Sometimes it goes back to just being in the right place, the right time, saying hi to the right person, which meets this other person, which boom, you're off and running, right? The other thing that can block you, of course, is anger, and that kind of goes with jealousy. I put those two together. When someone else gets it, do you feel bad? Do you feel jealous, envious, angry, right? When someone writes a book almost like your book, right? Maybe not even as good as your book, and it becomes a bestseller. Do you feel jealous, angry? How do you handle that? And a lot of this has to do with the competitive mind. And this is where it comes into, because when I was talking about the elite performance NLP, it has to do with how the competitive mind works, right? So we need to talk a little bit about the competitive mind. This, I think, can be one of the biggest blocks because it will activate all the others, right? The competitive mind, first of all, we have to realize it's part of our evolution, right? It's hardwired in, right? It's hardwired into us. This win-lose idea, the idea of scarcity, right? Because for millennia, we really, really competed for food and shelter and mates and to get our children to survive and everything. Everything was about competition. You had to be better than everyone else, right? And yes, we got into groups, so that took some of it, but even then, our group has to be better than your group, right, for us to win. That's what wars are fought over, all this other stuff. So it's kind of hardwired in, and it kind of feeds into the idea of scarcity. There's not enough. And again, I think in our current environment, which we don't need that much of a competitive mind sometimes, we need to be able to turn it off and on, and turn it on with conjunction of our creative mind. But that's a delicate balance, right? And then, as many people, talking to some people the last few weeks, I started thinking about this, not asking about this, but it's been kind of known by a lot of people. I know it. Do I do it enough? No. Is, when I'm not watching the news and I'm not constantly reading the news online, I feel better. Why? Because the news is all about scarcity. There's not enough. People aren't happy. There's scary things in the world, right? Which sets off the competitive mind, which makes you angry, jealous, resentful, and it just starts this whole thing, right? So if you really want to manifest miracles, I think you have to take a broad-based approach. I always say, think of a broad-based antibiotic. If you have something wrong but you're not quite sure what, right, and you go to the doctor, they'll give you a broad-based antibiotic because, it might be, bronchitis, it could be some other infection, it could be this. Why don't we give you this broad-based thing, a Z-Pak, something like that, which can attack many different things. So what we have to do is develop a broad-based approach to this, because when we get stuck, most people quit, but those that keep going, you're working on one level at a time. But unfortunately, if we go back to these blocks, when you're working through them, and you kind of get rid of the conscious interference, you start feeling worthy, you're open to how it'll come, well, maybe then your logical thinking kicks in. Well, you start working on your logical thinking, and then your anger and your jealousy kick in. So you work on that, and that kicks in your competitive mind. Now you're working on this. You start settling it up. Now you don't feel worthy again, right? So it's this cycle. So what has to happen is you need this broad-based approach, right? And it attacks all of the blocks at the same time and allows retraining of your reticular activating system, which we'll get to in a moment. So if you're working on a problem or trying to manifest a miracle and it's not manifested yet, assume there's a block or a technique issue, and interspersed with that would be the competitive mind. So whatever you're doing, do something different. Use our number one thing in NLP, which is if what you're doing doesn't work, do something else, right? Don't just keep doing what you're doing. Tweak it. Kind of do something different. So if there's miracles or goals you haven't manifested in your life yet, let's work on doing something different. Because it's all about, I think, retraining your reticular activating system. And that's that part of your mind that acts like a filter between your conscious and your subconscious mind. It takes instructions from your subconscious mind, passes them on to your subconscious, reprograms it, so it starts looking for cues in the real world, right? Some of it's hardwired in, right? When you're hungry, it passes that up to your consciousness, and then you're starting to look for food. You'll see every restaurant as you're driving, right? But have you ever been kind of hungry and then get really, really busy at something, and suddenly you don't have time to be hungry, right? So it's your reticular activating system can be tweaked. So again, if you're trying to manifest a miracle, you're trying to create something, you have to train this part of your mind so it can find the cues in the real world. Most of us use the old analogy of if you ever want a car, but you haven't decided what kind of car, you're looking at this car, that car, this car, then you decide I'm going to buy this. Suddenly you see that car everywhere you look. 3 days before that, you wouldn't have noticed it. Now you see it here, you see it there, because you've told your brain this is important to me. It's also why you get a lot of people that they only find one kind of person attractive. They'll walk into a place of eligible partners, but they only see the people that they're attracted to, right? But if they open up their scope, they might find the perfect partner, right? So now back to your reticular activating system, right? It needs retraining, and to do that, it has to be sensory based. What you see, what you hear, what you feel, externally and internally, what you smell and what you taste. It does not need logic, and it really has to light up your neurosystem, your neurology, right? And for this, emotion is the key. Again, when you go back from James Allen, Wallace Wattles, all the way up through to The Secret, it's all about emotion. You have to be emotionally vested in this goal, in this miracle you want to manifest, right? Because that can help drive you, and it really has to light up your neurology. And for this to work, I think you really have to use your hidden desires. Those things that no one else needs to know what really drives you, what trips your trigger, right? That's where you start getting the power. You want to do this because really it'll allow you to do this, right? No one needs to know that, right? So where are your blocks? And on a scale of 1 to 10, is it feeling worthy? Do you feel worthy of this, whatever it is, big business, perfect power, great relationship, whatever it happens to be, perfect health, right? Do you feel worthy of it, right? Did you do something in your past you think maybe I deserve this, this shit storm I'm going through? Excuse my language. But, so you got to work on your feeling worthy. Limiting how it will come. It can only come this way, It could come a lot of ways, right? If you're wanting financial independence, you could win the lotto. You could write a book. You could just stumble into the right situation at the right time, right? Because that's, again, opening to seeing the cues, because you're not seeing the cues. And that may be because you're using logical thinking. You have to do this first, that first, this first. Sometimes that doesn't happen that way. You know, um, Many big businesses get launched and fix stuff on the back end, right? And some of this may be knowing when to activate your competitive mind to get your juices flowing, to get you going, to get you moving, and also when to tamp that down and use the creative mind and be more blessings about when other people have it. And then what happens though when it says stop the cycle? As I said earlier, you work through one or two of these, you think it's this, you work on it, and then you really figure out it's this, you work on this, well, then this comes back. And so you get into these cycles, right? So really you kind of have to stop the cycle, and that can be difficult. So to me, one of the answers is, and I ask you to do this with me, is develop say an affirmation and a full sensory experience that attacks all the blocks at the same time and addresses the competitive mind, right? Something like my 7-figure business brings joy into many lives and helps my competition. And I see it manifest as this. Don't use too much logic, but whatever. Full seminar rooms, full webinars, people handing me money, bookings, my bank account, yada, yada, yada. And you make this fully sensory experience as you're imagining it, because what you want to do is tag in that full sensory experience with your shorter affirmation, if you will, to remind you and that you deserve it. That, and maybe somewhere at the end there you'd say, that not only helps your competition, but you realize the work you did to get there, right? So if you do that, it really starts to grow. I think that's the key. And that's what I've been currently working on. So I'm going to ask people to do this with me, right? So those of you who've been on a lot of my calls or listen to these on YouTube, I have nothing to sell. I just ask that you pass this on, because many people have parts of the answers, and maybe some have found it, right? So let's start to share it. There is no competition when it comes to this. My success does not diminish you. Your success does not diminish me, right? So pass this on. I'll be sending out the link to this on YouTube. So pass this on, because I want feedback from people, how they're attacking the problem. Where do they think it is? The thought process had been around for millennia, right? And many people had little parts, but nobody had the whole answer, it seems like, right? And let's break it down. This is what we do. This is what we do in NLP and hypnosis. We replicate it. So I ask you, pass it on. And again, there's no competition. Have fun with this, because I think it's wonderful. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for being on this little webinar. I look forward to working with you soon.